Every year, the world dies. The leaves turn gold and crimson, then brown, then nothing at all. The flowers bow their heads and surrender to the frost. Birds flee southward as if escaping some invisible enemy. And for thousands of years, humanity looked at this annual devastation and asked the only question that matters. Why? Why must beauty fade? Why must warmth abandon us? Why must the earth itself seem to grieve? The ancient Greeks had an answer. And like all their best answers, it was not a scientific explanation, but a story. A story about a mother's love, a king's loneliness, and a young woman caught between two worlds who would, in the end, choose to belong to both. This is the story of Hades and Persephone. This is why winter exists. But before we descend into darkness, we must begin in light. Imagine a world without seasons, a world of eternal spring, where flowers bloomed ceaselessly and harvests came without end. This was the world Demeter made. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, of grain and growing things, of everything that rises from the soil to feed mortal and immortal alike. She was not the most celebrated of the Olympians. She did not sit at Zeus's right hand or command armies or inspire epic poems, but she was in many ways the most essential. Without Ares, there would be no war. Without Aphrodite, no passion. But without Demeter, there would be no life at all. Every seed that split its shell, every stalk of wheat that bent heavy with grain, every orchard that dripped with fruit existed because she willed it so. And Demeter had a daughter. Her name was Kor, though the world would come to know her by another name. She was young, impossibly young, with the kind of beauty that had not yet learned to be self-conscious. While Aphrodite's beauty burned like fire, and Hera's commanded like a queen's, Kor's beauty was innocent. It was flowers opening at dawn. It was the first warm day after winter that the world had not yet learned to need. She spent her days in the meadows of Sicily, gathering blossoms with her companions, the nymphs and daughters of Oceanus, laughing as young women laugh when the world has not yet shown them its teeth. Demeter watched her daughter with a love that bordered on obsession. She had her reasons. The gods of Olympus were not known for respecting boundaries, especially not where beautiful young women were concerned. Zeus, Kor's own father, had a reputation that preceded him across continents. Poseidon was little better. Even Apollo, golden and cultured, could be relentless in his pursuits. Demeter kept her daughter close, kept her innocent, kept her in eternal springtime where nothing could wither or die or be taken against its will. It was protection. It was also, perhaps, a kind of cage. But cages built of love are still cages. Far below the meadows where Kor gathered flowers, beneath the roots of mountains and the beds of rivers, there was another realm entirely. The Underworld. Not the fiery hell of later religions, but something stranger and sadder. A vast gray kingdom where the shades of the dead drifted like autumn leaves caught in an endless wind. Rivers of forgetfulness wound through fields of asphodel. The great judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, Aeacus, weighed the deeds of mortals who had lived and died and now awaited their eternal assignment. And presiding over all of this, alone on a throne of shadow and cold iron, sat Hades. He was the eldest of the three brothers who had drawn lots for the universe. Zeus claimed the sky, with its lightning and eagles and endless attention. Poseidon took the seas, with their storms and treasures and nymphs beyond counting. Hades received what was left, the dead, the dark, the kingdom that no one wanted, but everyone would eventually enter. He did not complain. That was not his way. While his brothers quarreled and loved and made themselves gods among gods, Hades simply ruled. He was fair, which was more than most could say of the Olympians. He was consistent. The laws of death applied equally to kings and beggars, heroes and cowards. But he was alone, utterly, eternally alone. The dead cannot offer companionship. They barely remember they were ever alive. And the living did not visit, not willingly, not unless they had lost something they could not bear to lose. It is difficult to say when Hades first noticed Kor. The gods can see much from their various thrones, and perhaps he had watched her for years, a point of color in the gray monotony of his existence. She was everything his realm was not. Alive, bright, moving with the unconscious joy of someone who had never known darkness. He did not love her the way Zeus loved, which was to say, hungrily, briefly, and without consequence. Hades loved her the way the earth loves spring, desperately, impossibly. Knowing that such brightness was never meant for places like his, what happened next depends on who tells the story. In the oldest versions, Hades went to Zeus, brother to brother, king to king. He asked for Kor's hand in marriage, and Zeus, perhaps seeing an opportunity to bind the underworld more closely to Olympus, perhaps simply indifferent to the wishes of yet another daughter, agreed. He did not consult Demeter. Why would he? She was only the girl's mother. She was only the goddess who had raised Kor from infancy, who loved her more than the harvest itself, who would have burned the world to keep her safe. Zeus gave his permission with a nod, and the fate of the seasons was sealed. The day it happened was like any other. Kor wandered the meadows of Nysa with her companions, her arms full of narcissus flowers. The narcissus was new that year, impossibly beautiful, its petals white as snow, and its fragrance sweet enough to make the gods themselves grow drowsy. What Kor did not know was that the flower was a trap. Zeus had created it, or perhaps Gaia at Zeus's request, specifically to lure her to this place at this moment. Every bloom she gathered was a step closer to her ending, or her beginning, depending on how you choose to see it. The earth split open, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, a great chasm yawning in the meadow, as if the world itself had been wounded. And from that wound came a chariot of black gold, drawn by horses that breathed shadow, and at the reins stood a figure she had never seen, but immediately understood. Hades, Lord of the dead, come to claim his bride. She screamed. Of course she screamed. The nymphs fled in terror, scattering like birds before a hawk. Kor reached for anything, everything, her flowers falling from her arms as she was pulled into the chariot. Her fingers grasped the edge of the meadow, then nothing at all. The earth closed behind them as suddenly as it had opened, and where a moment ago there had been a young woman gathering blossoms in the spring sunshine, now there was only silence and a few scattered petals and the echo of a scream that no one on Olympus deigned to hear. But Demeter heard. Wherever she was, whatever she was doing, she felt the moment her daughter vanished from the world above. A mother's intuition, perhaps, or something deeper. The connection between harvest goddess and spring maiden was more than blood. It was the rhythm of life itself interrupted. Demeter abandoned her duties immediately. The fields could wait. The crops could wait. Nothing mattered except finding Kor. She searched for 9 days and 9 nights. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She carried torches through the darkness, calling her daughter's name until her voice grew hoarse and the flames burned down to embers. She asked everyone she encountered. Mortals shrank from her grief-maddened eyes. Gods pretended not to hear. Even Helios, the sun who sees all things from his chariot in the sky, was reluctant to speak. He knew what had happened. He had watched the abduction unfold from his position among the clouds. But the affairs of Zeus and his brothers were dangerous things to discuss, and even a god who drives the sun must be careful. Finally, he told her. Perhaps her grief moved him. Perhaps he simply could not bear another day of her desperate searching. Helios revealed everything. The arrangement between Hades and Zeus, the flower trap, the chariot, her daughter, even now, in the underworld, seated beside the king of the dead as his queen. Demeter listened, and something inside her, something that had always been warm and nurturing and green, turned to ice. She did not rage. She did not storm Olympus demanding justice. She did something far worse. She stopped. She stopped being the goddess of harvest. She withdrew her blessing from the earth, and without that blessing, nothing could grow. The grain that had stood tall and golden in the fields withered to gray stalks. The fruit rotted on the branch. Seeds planted in the soil simply lay there, refusing to sprout. And winter came, the first winter. The world had never known cold like this, had never seen snow fall on ground that had always been green. Mortals who had lived their entire lives in abundance suddenly found themselves starving. The gods took notice when the sacrifices stopped. Hungry mortals do not have surplus grain to burn on altars. They do not have fatted calves to slaughter in temple courtyards. The smoke that had always risen to Olympus, carrying the sweet scent of worship, grew thin and then disappeared entirely. Zeus was concerned. His siblings were concerned. Humans were dying by the thousands, and while the gods did not exactly need human belief to exist, they had grown accustomed to it. They enjoyed being worshipped. They enjoyed the temples and festivals and prayers. A world without mortals was a world without audience, and gods, above all things, require an audience. Messengers were sent to Demeter, first Iris, the rainbow goddess, gentle and diplomatic. Then others, less gentle, carrying threats and promises and appeals to reason. Demeter received them all in her grief-ravaged state, clothed in dark robes like a mortal mother in mourning, and she said the same thing to each of them. Bring back my daughter. Let her walk again in the sunlight. Or watch your precious world freeze and starve and die. There is no harvest without me. There is no life without my blessing. And there will be no blessing until Kor is returned. It was an ultimatum that could not be ignored. Zeus found himself in an impossible position. He had given Kor to Hades legally by the standards of divine law. To simply take her back would be to insult his brother, to undermine the authority of the underworld, to admit that he had been wrong. Kings do not admit wrongness easily, but the alternative was extinction, human extinction, the end of worship. Zeus swallowed his pride and sent Hermes, the messenger god, down to the realm of the dead with instructions to retrieve the girl. And here is where the story becomes complicated. Here's where we must look beyond the surface of the myth to ask what was actually happening in the underworld, while Demeter mourned above. Persephone, for she was Persephone now, not Kor, not the maiden, but the queen, had changed. The girl who had been dragged screaming into darkness was not the woman who sat beside Hades on the throne of the dead. Something had shifted. The ancient sources are ambiguous about what exactly transpired between the abduction and the arrival of Hermes. Some suggest that Hades kept her prisoner, that she wept for months in a gilded cage while the world above turned to winter. But other traditions hint at something more complex. That Hades, for all his fearsome reputation, was kind to her. That he gave her not a cell, but a kingdom. That he spoke to her not as a captor, but as someone who had been lonely for a very long time, and finally found a soul worth talking to. Consider what we know of Hades. He was not Zeus, collecting women like trophies and discarding them when he grew bored. He was not Poseidon, forcing himself on unwilling nymphs and then forgetting their names. In all of Greek mythology, Hades has exactly one love story. This one, Persephone. There are no other women, no string of affairs, no children born of casual encounters. He wanted only her, and when he finally had her, he did not treat her as a possession, but as an equal. She was not the consort of the underworld's king. She was the underworld's queen. She had power there, real power. The dead feared her as much as they feared him. Perhaps in those months underground, alone with a god who adored her, Persephone discovered something about herself. That she was not just the spring maiden, not just Demeter's sheltered daughter, but something darker and more complex. She had spent her entire existence in sunlight, but sunlight can be relentless. It allows no shadows, no secrets, no hidden depths. In the underworld, she found freedom of a different kind. Freedom from expectation. Freedom from her mother's suffocating protection. Freedom to become whoever she wanted to be, even if that meant becoming someone who chose darkness. This brings us to the pomegranate. When Hermes arrived with Zeus's command, Hades did not resist. He could not, really. Even the king of the dead must answer to the king of gods when the alternative is the destruction of the mortal world. He told Persephone she was free to go, that she could return to the meadows and the sunshine and her mother's arms. The chariot was prepared. The gates of the underworld stood open. But before she left, Hades offered her something, a single pomegranate, the fruit of the dead, grown in the gardens of his realm, its seeds glistening like rubies in the eternal twilight. Did she know what she was doing when she ate? The myths disagree. Some say she was tricked, that Hades pressed the seeds into her hand, and she consumed them without understanding the consequences. But look at the story more closely. Persephone had spent months in the underworld. She knew its laws better than any living being except its king. She knew that to eat the food of the dead was to be bound to that realm forever. 6 seeds. She ate 6 seeds, not one taken by accident, not the whole fruit consumed in hunger. 6, a precise number, a chosen number. Perhaps Persephone ate those seeds because she wanted to, because she was not ready to return to being the girl who gathered flowers and had no thoughts of her own, because she had found something in the darkness that the sunlight could never offer. The result was a compromise that satisfied no one and everyone. Persephone would spend 6 months of the year in the underworld with her husband, 6 months in the world above with her mother, half a queen, half a maiden, half dead, half alive, and the world would reflect her divided existence. When Persephone descended to rule beside Hades, Demeter's grief would freeze the earth, winter. When Persephone ascended to walk again in the meadows, Demeter's joy would bring life flooding back, spring. The seasons exist because a mother could not let go and a daughter could not fully return. Demeter never accepted it. She took her daughter back each spring with fierce joy, and she surrendered her each autumn with renewed anguish. The cycle repeated year after year, century after century, and Demeter's grief never lessened. This is the part of the myth that resonates most powerfully across time. Not the abduction, not the darkness, but the mother who could not accept that her child had grown into someone who wanted something she could not provide. Demeter's love was total, but total love can be totalizing. It leaves no room for the beloved to become anything other than what the lover needs them to be. Persephone, maiden of spring, could not also be Persephone, queen of the dead. Not in her mother's eyes, but in her own eyes she was both, and perhaps that was the point. The Greeks celebrated this story not with a simple telling, but with rituals. The Eleusinian mysteries, conducted for nearly 2,000 years in the town of Eleusis, reenacted the myth of Demeter and Persephone in secret ceremonies so sacred that initiates were forbidden from revealing their contents on pain of death. Emperors and slaves alike participated, all equal before the mysteries of life and death. What exactly happened in those ceremonies, we will never fully know. But we know what they promised: a better afterlife, comfort in the face of mortality, the assurance that just as Persephone returned from the dead each spring, so too might the initiates find something beyond the gray fields of asphodel. Death, in this telling, was not an ending, but a transformation. Persephone entered the underworld as a captive and emerged as its queen. She lost the innocent joy of eternal spring, but gained something else: depth, power, a throne beside the one God who would never betray her. The Greeks looked at the changing seasons and saw not just the grief of Demeter, but the triumph of Persephone. Every winter was a reminder that darkness is survivable. Every spring was proof that death is not permanent. The cycle continues. Life follows death, follows life. In our modern age, we have found new ways to tell this ancient story. The musical Hadestown reimagines Hades and Persephone as a troubled couple in a Depression-era industrial underworld. Their relationship a metaphor for climate change and capitalism, and the way we sacrifice the future for present comfort. The video game Hades presents Persephone as a woman who chose to leave Olympus, chose darkness over the petty politics of the gods above, chose to make a home in a place no one else wanted. These retellings resonate because the core truth of the myth remains relevant: that love is complicated, that growth requires leaving the garden, that sometimes the monster's lair is the only place where you can finally become yourself. There is another angle to consider. In the oldest versions of this myth, predating even the Greeks, Persephone was not a goddess who was taken to the underworld. She was the underworld. She was an ancient chthonic deity, queen of the dead in her own right, worshipped with fear and offerings long before anyone thought to give her a mother or a husband. The story of her abduction may be a later addition, a way of explaining how a goddess of death came to be associated with springtime and flowers. The myth might be inverted. Perhaps Persephone was not dragged down to the darkness. Perhaps the darkness was where she began, and the light, The meadows, the innocence, the mother's arms, was the temporary state from which she returned to her true home. This reading changes everything. It makes Persephone not a victim, but a power in her own right, one who chooses to walk in sunlight for a season, but always belongs to the deep places. It makes Demeter's grief not just maternal loss, but something more universal, the mourning of life for its inevitable return to earth, of summer for its surrender to winter, of all living things for the death that waits at every road's end. In this version, the seasons do not exist because Demeter weeps. They exist because Persephone divides herself. She is the cycle itself, simultaneously the flower and the grave, the seedling and the harvest, the first warm day of spring and the final freeze of autumn. What, then, does this myth teach us? Perhaps it teaches that change is inevitable, that childhood cannot last forever, no matter how much a parent might wish it, that leaving home, even leaving for a place as strange and dark as the underworld, is sometimes necessary for becoming who you are meant to be. Kore, the maiden, was perfect in her innocence. But Persephone, the queen, is magnificent in her complexity. She did not remain in the light because the light was safe and familiar. She chose to descend, to rule, to become something her mother could never have imagined. And every year, she returns not as a prodigal daughter, but as an equal. Demeter can keep her for a season, but only a season. The underworld calls, and Persephone answers. Or perhaps the myth teaches something about love itself, that to truly love someone is to accept that they will leave, that you cannot hold spring in your hands any more than you can stop winter from coming. Demeter's tragedy is not that she lost her daughter. It is that she could not let go. Her grief froze the world because she demanded the impossible, that time stop, that change halt, that her child remain forever, the girl gathering flowers in the meadow. The world nearly ended because one goddess refused to accept the natural order. And in the resolution, Persephone's return each spring, we see not a happy ending, but a compromise with grief. The pain does not disappear. It becomes cyclical. Demeter mourns and the world winters. Demeter rejoices and the world springs. The emotion does not diminish. It merely repeats. Perhaps that is the most honest thing the Greeks ever said about loss, that it does not end, that we do not get over things so much as we learn to live with their rhythm. The first winter without Kore must have been unbearable for Demeter. The 20th, perhaps, slightly less so. By the 1000th, the goddess had learned to expect the ache, to prepare for it, to let it wash over her and recede like the tide. This is not healing. This is endurance. And maybe that is all any of us can hope for when we lose what we love most. Far beneath the earth, in halls that have never seen sunlight, the queen sits upon her throne. She is beautiful still, though her beauty has sharpened into something that no longer needs the sun. Pomegranate stains her lips. Shadows curl at her feet like faithful hounds. Around her, the dead bow and whisper her name with reverence that Olympus has never shown. She chose this. In the end, in the moment that mattered, she chose this. Not the meadows, not the flowers, not the endless springtime of her mother's protection. She chose depth over simplicity, power over innocence, a crown over a garland. And when the time comes to ascend again, to walk once more in sunlight, she does so not as a returning captive, but as a visiting queen. The meadows are pleasant, the warmth is welcome, but they are not her kingdom. They have not been her kingdom for a very long time. Above her, Demeter waits. She has been waiting for centuries, and she will wait for centuries more. Every spring she greets her daughter with the desperation of a mother who never stops fearing the goodbye. Every autumn she watches Persephone descend with grief that has not lessened since the very first time. The wheat grows and withers and grows again. The snow falls and melts and falls again. The cycle turns, the story repeats, and somewhere in the turning, in the repetition, there is meaning, there is comfort, there is the strange, sad assurance that even death is not permanent, that the queen who rules the dead once laughed in sunlit meadows, that the flowers which die each winter will bloom again when she returns. The ancient Greeks looked at the world and saw story everywhere. in the phases of the moon, in the crash of thunder, in the slow procession of seasons across the calendar. They could not explain why leaves fell, or why snow came, or why the earth seemed to sleep for months before waking to abundance. But they could feel it. They could feel the sorrow of those dark months when nothing grew and the cold crept into their bones. And so they told a story about sorrow, about a mother's love and a daughter's choice, and a God who was not evil, only lonely, only seeking what all beings seek, someone to share the long hours with. In the end, Hades got his queen. Demeter got her daughter back, at least for half of each year. Persephone got to be two things at once, maiden and monarch, spring and shadow, daughter and wife. And we got the seasons. The endless turning of life into death, into life again. The promise that the cold will break, that the flowers will return, that somewhere beneath the frozen ground, there is a queen counting down the days until she can walk among us once more. Winter is coming. It always is. But so is spring.